I remember a time when liberalism was a welcoming mentality, when liberals supported peace instead of war, free speech instead of censorship, the live and let live mentality, and better conditions for the poor. I grew up at a time when religious conservatives would lecture us from their soapboxes on what behavior was considered moral, and when neoconservatives would call us unpatriotic for questioning the wars.
Either you are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
While I've long known that both political parties primarily served their campaign donors, liberal-minded people seem to be more reasonable in their views. They seem to be more compassionate and less judgmental. But those days are long gone now.
And you tell them they're not welcome!
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood.
This isn't just about Ukraine or its national security, it's about our national security.
A man and a woman.
So where did it all go wrong? How did JFK-era liberalism that valued peace, free speech, and the working class shapeshift into a judgmental, authoritarian, and hawkish party made up largely by elites? This anti-war sentiment remained a liberal idea into the Iraq War, even though both political parties have been functionally the same over the past several decades when it comes to foreign policy. Senator Obama used this to his advantage in 2008 when he attacked Hillary Clinton in the primaries for her support of the Iraq War.
Once we had driven the bus into the ditch, there were only so many ways we could get out. The question is, who's making the decision initially to drive the bus into the ditch? And the fact is that Senator Clinton often says that she is ready on day one, but in fact she was ready to give in to George Bush on day one on this critical issue.
While Obama campaigned on an anti-war platform, he didn't exactly govern that way. He authorized the strike on Libya in 2011, and his administration was heavily involved in supporting the Syrian rebels. These were the first signs of a shift amongst those on the left, and this was made apparent when many liberals criticized Tulsi Gabbard for meeting with President Assad of Syria to try and bring about some sort of peace.
Oh, she's an Assad toady.
What does that mean?
She is
What's a toady?
I think that I used that word correctly. Jamie, can you check what toady means?
The 2016 election brought about a strange turning point for the left-right paradigm when it came to foreign policy, as Donald Trump campaigned on somewhat of an anti-war platform, whereas Hillary Clinton was much more hawkish. Many liberals refused to agree with Trump on anything, even if he was campaigning on some ideas that they would have supported just a few years prior.
If you listen to him and you listen to some of the folks that I've been listening to, that's why we've been in the Middle East for 15 years and we haven't won anything. I only tell the truth, lobbyists. We've spent $5 trillion all over the Middle. We have to rebuild our country. We have to rebuild our infrastructure. You listen to that, you're going to be there for another 15 years.
All right, Governor Bush, please.
After the election, the left went all in on the Russia collusion story, causing a strong anti-Russia sentiment to build amongst liberals. On the right, many conservatives became more populist, which meant that they wanted to focus on improving the US instead of getting involved in pointless wars. Many Republican dissidents, like Liz Cheney, were the ones that were the neocons that were known to be the most hawkish in the party.
We started to see this phenomenon where there was an ascending level of belief and trust and confidence in the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, and other institutions among Democrats especially, and it plummeted on the other side of the aisle. Now, there are some obvious reasons for that, but still it's remarkable because historically Democrats and liberals have always mistrusted the intelligence services, and this goes back a long way. I mean, this goes back to the late 50s and early 60s.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, the left has been in lockstep with their support for sending an endless amount of money to Ukraine, whereas the conservatives have a libertarian wing that has resisted this in part. Tucker Carlson and Laura Ingraham, of all people, have been some of the biggest anti-war voices on television, whereas 20 years ago it would have been unfathomable that the most popular shows on Fox News would be promoting these types of ideas.
At the New York Times, left-wing warmonger Bret Stephens is also calling on America to sink the Iranian Navy. Many on the left are for it.
The anti-Russia hysteria on the left has gotten so crazy that many liberals will call you a Russian puppet for even questioning the $113 billion that was sent to Ukraine in 2022. For context, This is enough money to give every homeless person in the US nearly $200,000.
Yeah, that was Rand Paul parroting Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia's propaganda today.
Okay, so liberals may have shifted a bit on foreign policy, but they are still the compassionate ones who care about creating better conditions for the poor and working class, right? Well, not exactly. With the emergence of Bernie Sanders, it looked like the left was moving in a direction that appealed to the working class. But not only did this not pan out, but the left actually ended up moving in the opposite direction. Bernie's main idea was Medicare for All, which was actually an idea that JFK and Martin Luther King used to talk about, but he ended up strongly supporting Clinton and Biden, who both trashed Medicare for All in their campaigns. When the notoriously liberal group of congresswomen called the Squad had the power to force a vote on Medicare for All in the House, they folded. There has been no progress on Medicare for All, and barely anyone on the left even talks about it anymore.
So just a handful of progressives could say, Nancy Pelosi, we're withholding our vote from you for Speaker unless you bring up Medicare for All for vote on the floor. That's our deal. Now, it's up to Nancy Pelosi. Do you want to risk your speakership, or do you want to make sure we have a vote on a basic human right?
It's getting harder to remember now, but it wasn't always a right-wing position to question the wisdom of endless illegal immigration. Unions have historically been a large constituency of the Democratic Party, and it was the belief that floods of illegal workers drove down wages.
Open borders. That's a Koch brothers proposal. The idea, of course, I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state.
The Obama administration deported a record amount of illegals, built the so-called cages, and Obama himself even said this in 2008. When I see Mexican flags waved at pro-immigration demonstrations, I sometimes feel a flush of patriotic resentment. When I'm forced to use a translator to communicate with the guy fixing my car, I feel a certain frustration. A big reason that the left has changed is because its constituency has changed. The working class has been largely abandoned in favor of upper-middle-class college-educated voters who vote Democrat in large numbers. The idea of student loan forgiveness has been sold as a policy to help middle-class people in their 20s and 30s who are burdened with debt, but it does absolutely nothing to fix the underlying problem of overpriced universities, and roughly 60% of student loan debt is held by people who make over $74,000 per year, many of whom have graduate degrees. This policy that would disproportionately benefit the upper middle class people is subsidized by taxpayers who didn't go to college or work part-time jobs to pay for it.
At the end of the day, this group who is doing better in life than everybody else, let's be honest, it is basically 50-50. If you're more educated, even some college, you're going to earn more over the course of your lifetime than others, just got a tremendous gift from the US government.
Liberals always talk about how more money needs to go to the poor, but the city of LA spends over $800,000 per homeless person for a house. Much of the money spent goes to overbloated government agencies, no-bid contracts, or is outright stolen. The pandemic spending was the epitome of this, where $6 trillion was spent, with 75% of that going to the top 20%.
Opening the economy isn't about helping Wall Street or benefiting capitalists. People have it backward. Keeping it closed is allowing the banks and investors to squeeze any and every last ounce of financial freedom we might have had away from us.
The left talked about the lockdowns and subsequent government spending as if it was an ethical duty to support these positions. Those who didn't support them were grandma killers. Those who didn't support them weren't woke. Wokeness has been the driving force behind whipping up support for radical positions, and the looming threat of being ostracized is usually powerful enough to prevent straying from the party line. This is because wokeness is like a cult, and anyone who breaks from the mob on even one issue is exiled from the group. Just ask J.K. Rowling.
I mean, this is J.K. Rowling. She's known politically to be somebody on the left. The mere idea that she's full of hate is clearly nonsense. Her opinions are more pro-women than anti-anything else.
A common trend amongst the left is the excessive use of hyperbole. Terms such as white supremacist, fascist, Nazi, Russian puppet, and anti-vaxxer are thrown around so liberally that they have largely lost their meaning. But these words have been used to justify cheering for censorship on almost every major social media platform and even some crowdfunding sites. The left had an about face on antitrust laws and now took the longtime conservative position that these companies could do whatever they want because they were private. That is until Elon Musk bought Twitter, causing the left to go into a meltdown.
Elon Musk must be super proud, brought Nazis back to Twitter.
Wokeness is not just annoying, but it has been the driving force behind left-wing authoritarianism. For example, 29% of Democrats responded to a poll that they were in favor of unvaccinated parents getting their children taken away. Liberals were largely in support of deplatforming doctors and scientists who question the vaccine, or foreign policy experts who question the narrative on Ukraine.
How can anyone deny that Democrats have become incredibly authoritarian, no matter what you want to say about Republicans, which we'll get to, when it's Democrats who overwhelmingly favor both government and corporate control of the internet in the name of political speech and combating misinformation, while Republicans overwhelmingly want the internet to remain free. Those numbers are just indisputable.
Around 2010, there was a lot of anti-war sentiment on the left due to the disaster of the wars in the Middle East. And there was also a lot of focus on economic issues after the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis. Conspiracy-minded people might think that the establishment needed to find cultural issues that would provide a distraction to take focus away from Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. But this does seem to be the time that there was a massive uptick in social drama, particularly in issues having to do with race and gender. The race issue was ignited with the death of Trayvon Martin and the subsequent formation of Black Lives Matter. The movement grew, as did the idea that systemic racism was a major issue in America. But if the goal has been to create racial harmony and better conditions for the Black community, BLM and the left have largely failed in achieving these goals. Up until 2013, roughly 70% of both blacks and whites believed that racial relations in the US were good. That number has dropped all of the way to roughly 35%. The homicide rate in American cities has risen over 30% since 2012, and the lockdowns that the left so fervently supported disproportionately hurt the educational outcomes of poor minorities.
Cop killings of black men became a national obsession because it was in the phone. It has taught a whole generation of white Americans, and not just a generation, but even older ones, that things are worse than they are, and or to pretend that they're worse than they are as a way of signaling your morality. A tribal feeling emerged, and it was because of Facebook and Twitter.
The other popular issue is the gender issue. When same-sex marriage became the law of the land in 2015, that issue was largely neutralized, so a new cultural issue needed to take its place. Enter transgenderism. Which bathrooms should trans people use? Should trans people be in the military? Should trans women participate in women's sports? There's a fine line between believing that trans people deserve the same human rights as everyone else and denying basic biological realities.
In the wake of America about to lose abortion rights, the ACLU recently tweeted a list of those who would be disproportionately harmed by this. You would think women might top that list? No, wasn't even on the list. Second on the list was LGBT. Really? Abortion rights affects gay and trans people more than, breeders? I'm happy for LGBT folks that we now live in an age where they can live their authentic lives openly. And we should always be mindful of respecting and protecting. But someone needs to say it. Not everything's about you.
These cultural issues had an appeal to many because it has turned victimhood into a form of social credit. What was once LGBT is now LGBTQIA2S+. We now often hear words like xenophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, arachnophobia. Well, maybe not that last one. But victimhood extends to women, Jews, and people of color. Almost anyone except for straight, white, non-Jewish males can claim some sort of victimhood if they want to, and this desire to satisfy their egos has been largely placated by major figures on the left.
The GOP is now doing what it is best at, weaponizing hate against a black, beautiful Muslim woman. I am so sorry, sis, that our country is failing you today through this chamber.
So what changed all of this? The rise of Trump was a huge part. Trump campaigned on economic populism, which had an appeal to many working-class voters on the left. As a response, the left used Trump's off-putting behavior to counter his message with a focus on social issues, and in the process, they sacrificed working-class voters in exchange for upper-middle-class college-educated voters on the right who were disgusted with Trump. These social issues served as an opportunity for the upper-middle class to claim moral superiority, while also providing justification for authoritarian positions as a means of combating Trumpism, allowing for the left to function like a quasi-religion. Lastly, the intense anti-Russia sentiment and hyper-focus on systemic racism meant that the anti-war movements and Occupy Wall Street, both of which emerged around 2010, would be neutralized. Therefore, business would carry on as usual.
Can we get beyond this and actually start focusing on what the real problem is? Centralized establishment, elite power that does not afford real democracy to ordinary people. No, we can't focus on that because otherwise it would fuck up our gig.
For everyone who feels alienated from this modern incarnation of the left, but is also definitely not a conservative, just know that you are not alone, and there are a lot more of us than you think.